My name is Christy Pushki, and this is my personal tragedy to triumph story about how my recovery from chronic illness led me to my life's purpose. Because of what I've gone through, I'm on a mission to educate others about the hidden dangers lurking in most processed foods, and I sincerely hope that you'll take the time to review the information I'm sharing here and that it will compel you to adopt changes in your own life. Although my particular symptoms were ultimately diagnosed as fibromyalgia, you could insert countless other health conditions and get this same story and solution. Please know that all information contained in this recording is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Always consult with your medical professional before making any changes to your medications or other treatment plans. Chronic pain and fatigue stole several years of my life. In retrospect, it appears I'm one of the lucky ones. At the time, however, I wasn't sure how I would make it through another day, or what the point would be even if I did. I was in pure misery, suffering from an invisible illness for which there was no treatment and no cure, and really, no clear cause. I was in constant pain. Many days, it was too painful even to hug my own husband. These were the worst years of my life by a long shot. I was 25 years old, and I was just finishing up my final year of graduate school. I was just getting started with my adult life when the rug was pulled out from under me. Life, as I had known it, was over. Good health was something I had always taken for granted, I suppose. I lived the first 25 years of my life without any real medical problems. Never a broken bone, no major surgeries, never a hospital stay, no chronic conditions, and no need for regular prescription medications. However, in August 2002, all of that changed. And now I'm finally sitting down to share my story with anyone who will listen. In preparation for sharing my story, I spent several hours reviewing my medical records at my doctor's office and taking detailed notes by hand because they wanted to charge me 50 cents per page to make photocopies, and that would have added up to a pretty penny with all of the records in my file. I am also blessed to have kept a journal at various times throughout my years of illness, so I've compiled many of those details here as well. August 3rd, 2002. I guess you could say this is the day that changed my life forever. I began feeling ill with what appeared to be flu-like symptoms. My throat was sore and I was extremely fatigued. I couldn't go to work more than half of the day because I would get so exhausted I'd have to go home early. My muscles were very weak. It felt as though weights were tied to my arms. My neck was stiff and painful from the shoulder line up to the base of my skull. It felt like someone had beaten me with a bat. I also had pain in my upper arms. This felt more like a burning sensation that's difficult to describe. Additionally, the glands in my neck and under my arms were sore and tender to the touch, and there was a similar soreness that spread across my chest from underarm to underarm. I had intermittent chills at this point, but never a fever. After 3 days of these symptoms, I made an appointment with my primary physician. I can't really say specifically why I was compelled to visit the doctor, other than to say that I had never felt so sick in my life. I thought that maybe if I got to the doctor soon enough, we could get a handle on things and I could get on with my daily life. I was so relieved to get to the doctor, assuming this would be the beginning of a solution for my symptoms. He tested me for strep, but the test came back negative. He diagnosed me with a viral infection and told me to rest, drink plenty of fluids, and take Tylenol as needed for pain. 4 days later, my throat was no longer sore, but my other symptoms had actually worsened. By this point, I also began having ear pain and some nausea. Perhaps you're listening to this and thinking, big deal, sounds like you had the flu. Well, I assure you, this was worse than any flu I had ever experienced, and I was scared that something was really wrong. It was day 7 of symptoms, and I seemed to actually be getting progressively worse. I wondered if perhaps my strep test had been a false negative, or if by some chance I had mono or something else they hadn't tested for the first time, so I returned to my primary physician. He ran another strep test and a mono test. Both were negative. At this point, my doctor prescribed 10 days of amoxicillin, stating that perhaps I had some sort of bacterial infection. After all, with most viruses, people are usually feeling better by the 7th day. 10 days and an entire round of antibiotics later, I still didn't feel any better. I called my doctor and he prescribed another 10 days of amoxicillin. 8 days later, I was still not feeling better. In case you've lost count, at this point, it's been 25 days since I first got sick. And I'm not just saying that I was still a bit sore or a little tired. I was absolutely no better than on day 1, except that my throat was no longer sore. My doctor prescribed a 3rd round of amoxicillin along with a round of steroids. He suggested that if I weren't feeling better in 1 more week, then I should visit an ENT specialist. 1 more week, I thought? It's already been more than 3. At this point, my mom advised me not to take this 3rd round of antibiotics, because she had actually heard of people who were prescribed too many antibiotics, and they actually felt better once they stopped taking them. So I didn't take this 3rd round of antibiotics, but I felt that I should probably go to the ENT. On September 3rd, I returned to my physician because my symptoms were not improving. In addition, my throat was swollen again, and I was now having shooting pains in my left shoulder as well. However, the neck stiffness and pain was my most unbearable symptom at this point. There was nothing I could do to get comfortable, and it was painful and exhausting just to hold my head upright. At this point, the part of the day I looked forward to most was bedtime. I just longed to fall asleep because that's the only time I wasn't suffering. It felt like I had an awful case of the flu, with horrible body aches, except it would not go away. This day marked 1 month since it all began. None of the medications had offered any relief or improvement in my condition, so my physician scheduled an appointment for me with an ENT specialist the following day. I remember feeling so excited for my ENT appointment. I just knew that he was going to figure this whole thing out and get me fixed up right away. After all, that's what specialists do, right? Besides, he probably saw cases like mine every day, and I was sure my symptoms were small-time stuff as far as a specialist would be concerned. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be so simple. In fact, the ENT specialist said that I didn't even have any swollen glands. I could not believe my ears. No swollen glands, but I was in so much pain under my arms and in my neck. He told me that he was sorry, but he could find no ENT explanation for my pain. I was devastated. How could I go on like this? The ENT recommended that I see a rheumatologist to determine if I had fibromyalgia. If that exam was negative, then he suggested I see a neurologist to rule out MS or some other less likely diagnoses. At this point, he felt that I had a musculoskeletal problem. Well, that all sounded just a bit more serious than I had hoped. I was really banking on him finding something a bit more temporary and sending me on my merry way. I'm not really sure how things progressed over the next few months. Apparently, according to my records, I did not pursue any appointments with any other specialists until January 2003. There's nothing in my medical records for those 4 months, and I really don't remember why I didn't rush off to the next specialist as the ENT had suggested. Perhaps I felt a little better. Perhaps I had gotten used to the pain a bit. Most definitely I was scared of what I might find out. Additionally, I had done a bit of research on the internet about fibromyalgia, and I remember feeling that it seemed like a catch-all diagnosis to me. Fibromyalgia is not a disease, but rather a syndrome, a cluster of symptoms. To me, that just wasn't a good enough answer for what I was experiencing, and it seemed like a fairly useless diagnosis that meant not much more than, we have figured out many diseases that you don't have, but we still don't really know what's wrong with you, but hey, there are tons of other folks who have your symptoms, oh, but there's not much we can do for you. That didn't really seem worth the copay. On January 2nd, 2003, I returned to my primary physician because I continued to experience the pain, tenderness, and weakness in my neck, shoulders, arms, and chest that had begun in August. I was growing weary with daily life because the simplest of tasks had become a struggle. It was becoming impossible to lift things or do things that required raising my arms above my head. I couldn't even dry my hair without taking rest breaks. It was exhausting just to get up and get dressed and ready, let alone to go anywhere or do anything. I was also experiencing a new symptom at this point, tingling and numbness almost constantly in my upper arms and intermittently across my chest. Well, I was wise enough to know that tingling and numbness could be pretty serious, so I decided to check back in with my physician. There just had to be an answer. I remember I would almost get excited when a new symptom would emerge because I would think, wow, maybe this will be the symptom that finally puts all of the pieces of this puzzle together and allows the doctors to identify exactly what's wrong with me. My doctor prescribed some naproxen and did some x-rays of my chest and cervical spine, which came back normal. He made an appointment for me with a neurologist later that week, Finally, it seemed we might be onto something. Tingling and numbness sounded like just the things that a neurologist should be able to diagnose. A few days later, I visited the neurologist. He did a complete neurological exam. If you're not familiar, these exams are very thorough and detailed, which really gave me a lot of hope because I had never been examined so thoroughly. I just knew they were onto something. In addition, they ordered a bunch of blood work. I passed this exam with flying colors, and the blood work was all negative too. It may seem weird, but I was a bit disappointed. At this point, I was so exhausted by the whole ordeal, and I just wanted an answer. Someone to tell me that they knew what the problem was. Of course, I was also relieved because I certainly did not want to be dealing with any sort of neurological disorder either. The neurologist concluded that he couldn't rule out a myopathic process, so he ordered an MRI of my cervical spine. This too came back as normal. He prescribed nortriptyline for my pain. I refilled this prescription several times, but it sure didn't take care of the problem. I was suffering horribly, but every test told me I was normal. I knew I was anything but normal. Normal people don't feel like this. Spring of 2003. Throughout the spring, my symptoms continued. It was difficult to wrap my brain around it all because I had different symptoms at different times. The most challenging symptom for me by far was this difficult to describe pain in my lungs. The best way I can describe it is that it felt like someone was scraping out the inner lining of my lungs with a razor blade. This is the symptom that basically robbed me of my personality and devastated me to the core. I had always been that bubbly person who loved to socialize and clown around. As this symptom progressed, though, I became less and less able to do so. It got to the point that when I attended social functions and family get-togethers, I didn't even really talk because I knew there would be a price to pay. Even now, it almost makes me cry just to explain this part of the story. I loved to sing along to music, especially while I was driving, but I just couldn't do things like that anymore. In fact, this quickly became my gauge for whether or not I was having a good day. I would rush into the house after work and tell my husband, "Guess what? Guess what? I was singing in the car on the way home today," and we would fill with joy at the thought that I had had some relief, as temporary as it may have been. Gosh, it sounds so silly and minuscule looking back on it now, but those little glimmers of hope really made a difference at the time. Another one of my most challenging symptoms was a ripping pain in my chest that felt like my ribs were tearing away from my sternum. Doctors often mistook this for costochondritis. I would also have lots of burning sensations, especially from the base of my neck down my upper arms. I suffered for a while with IBS as well, irritable bowel syndrome. During that time, I lived on plain boiled chicken breasts and plain rice just to avoid abdominal pain. Fatigue was also a major issue for me, which is why I originally thought I might have mono. I also didn't sleep well. I would awaken many times each night and often had much difficulty getting back to sleep. I would just wake up and feel wide awake in the middle of the night. I had also become hypersensitive to touch. I couldn't wear a bra because it felt too constricting, like I couldn't breathe well. I also couldn't bear the pain if I would lie down and my shirt was folded over, causing me to lay on the edge of it. Just that much of a crease in the material could send me through the roof. I couldn't lean against a wall because even that much pressure was too painful. Even to rest my elbows on my upper legs, as I would like to do when sitting, was out of the question. I couldn't wear a seatbelt either because that pressure was way too painful. In fact, driving was by far the worst task for me because just holding my arms up to the steering wheel was excruciating and exhausting for my neck, shoulders, arms, and chest. Possibly one of my strangest symptoms, though, was that loud noises caused me pain. And I don't mean that the noises hurt my ears or gave me a headache. I mean, the pain I was feeling anywhere in my body was greatly exacerbated by loud noises, such as the bass in loud music or children screaming in a phone caller's background. It was also very painful for me to be startled. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but if someone startled me, it was like pain shot through my entire body somehow. Also, my heart would often race. I could feel my pulse pounding throughout my entire body. Doctors treated me for anxiety, but I knew that was not me at all. I knew that my body was just exhibiting symptoms. I couldn't figure out why it was happening, but I knew I wasn't anxious. My heart would race, and I had pretty constant pains in my chest, but there was no way I was having panic attacks. During this time, I often went home from work for my lunch break. Even though it was a 30-minute round-trip drive, the remaining 30 minutes that I got to rest on my comfy couch at home was something that I looked forward to. There was a hospital halfway between my office and my house, and I can't even count the number of times that I was driving past that hospital debating whether or not to just march myself into the emergency room. But then reality would set in, and I'd feel so hopeless realizing that if all those other specialists hadn't figured me out, then some ER doctor probably wouldn't either. But then again, maybe I would luck out and happen to get a doctor who would just happen to have seen a case like mine before, and like a fairy tale, this whole ordeal would come to a happy resolution. In the end, logic always prevailed, and I just kept driving. By this point in my illness, my friends and family and I were spending a lot of time Googling things on the internet, trying to come up with a diagnosis and a solution for me. In no time at all, this research became like my part-time job. It was such a catch-22, though, because I didn't even have the energy to go to work and cook dinner, let alone to spend hours per day on a wild goose chase on the computer. But then again, I really wanted to get better. Looking for answers eventually became a source of stress in itself. Every time someone made a suggestion to me, I would tirelessly research their lead on the internet, hoping for an answer. But I always came up dry. In May, I went back to my primary physician. This time I had been experiencing extreme pain on the side of my face and a shooting pain in my right ear for about a month. I was prescribed Rhinantin, and according to my medical record, I had right serous otitis, presumably based on eustachian tube dysfunction. A week later, I returned to my doctor because I had no improvement at all, even with Vioxx and corticosteroids. I was prescribed Vicoprofen until I could get a mouthpiece. My doctor felt it was probably TMJ and sent me to a dental specialist. This dentist said that I had TMJ, and he gave me a mouthpiece to wear at night, which greatly improved the condition. Throughout the summer, I started experiencing stiffness in my knee joints, particularly when bending or kneeling. It would feel like I needed to oil my joints in order to straighten them. Gradually, I began exercising less and less because of my knee pain and stiffness. In August, I finally went back to the doctor because I had so much pain in my knees, especially the right one. He thought it might be my meniscus, so he sent me to sports medicine. They said I had arthritis and tight quads, and they sent me to physical therapy. Much of the time I was going to physical therapy, it was actually my left knee causing me the most pain, even though my right knee had been worse since the beginning and was the reason I originally sought treatment in the first place. They thought this was strange, but reasoned that perhaps it was due to overcompensating for the other knee. The left knee especially hurt on the inner side, with many positions feeling like my knee would get stuck in a bent position or snap if I tried to straighten it. Unfortunately, my physical therapist could see no mechanical reason for this pain, and he wasn't really sure what to do about it. Around this time, I also had one really bad weekend where I was laid up in bed because the front of my thighs were burning so bad, like the feeling I usually only had in my upper arms and back of my neck. Now I'm going to share with you a journal entry from November 2003. I finally went to the doctor for the pain I've been having in my lower chest, especially on the left side. It's painful to roll over, twist, cough, or bend, and it's especially painful to strain or lift heavy things. It generally hurts way more if touched. For the past few months, I have frequently awakened in the night to a feeling that, for lack of a better description, feels like my ribs are going to snap at the point where they attach to my sternum. Until now, I've only had this pain in the middle of the night, well, with a bit of lingering tenderness in that spot the next morning. But now, if I touch that spot any time of day, it feels just like the middle of the night pain, and it's excruciating. When it happens in the night, I often must call out for my husband so he can wake up and push me over. I'm always laying on my side when this happens, and if I roll over by myself, it feels like the most awful tearing sensation, like my ribs are literally tearing away from my sternum, kind of like a shin splint feeling, but in my chest. It hurts a bit less if I allow my husband to roll me over, because I'm not using my muscles, I guess. Who knows? So the doctor performed x-rays and said it was probably costochondritis or pleurodynia caused by a viral infection. He prescribed an anti-inflammatory twice a day and said to come back if I didn't feel better in 48 hours. The pain continued to worsen, despite taking the anti-inflammatory meds regularly for 2 days, and it eventually spread throughout my entire chest and around the back of my rib cage. Needless to say, I was back at the doctor just 48 hours later. By this point, breathing had become quite painful. He seemed a bit surprised that I hadn't improved. He prescribed Darvocet for my pain and decided that with the variety of body aches I had suffered from during the past year, a visit to a rheumatologist wouldn't be a bad idea. He thought I had fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is a syndrome, a complex of symptoms that tend to co-occur together, but for which there is no single identifiable cause. The primary symptoms of fibromyalgia are chronic widespread pain, chronic fatigue, and sleep disturbances. I requested something for anxiety at this point because someone had suggested to me that perhaps I was anxious and tensing my muscles too much or something, and that maybe if I relaxed, my body could heal better. I stayed home from work the rest of the day, which was a Friday, and rested all weekend too, and took the anti-inflammatory and the anti-anxiety meds. By Monday, I was feeling quite a bit better, although there was still some tenderness to the touch in various parts of my chest, especially near the top of my sternum and in my back. At this point, it had been well over a year since my symptoms began. I decided to go ahead and visit a rheumatologist. He conducted a tender points exam and reviewed my symptom history and medical file. He concluded that I was suffering from fibromyalgia. He prescribed nortriptyline for bedtime to aid with sleep because it was possible I was not getting the deep, restorative sleep that I needed in order to feel well. He also suggested moderate exercise daily, and he wanted me to return for a follow-up visit in 1 month. A few weeks later, my chest and lung pain was really hitting me hard, so I returned to my physician. He recommended a cervical spine MRI because he suspected a neurological disorder or possibly an inflammatory myopathic process. In the meantime, he started me on tramadol for pain and Protonix in case I had acid reflux as well, because this was common in my family. A few days later, the cervical spine MRI revealed nothing. Shortly thereafter, I returned to the rheumatologist for my follow-up visit. I was feeling somewhat better and was sleeping better as well. However, I was still awakening several times each night, so he increased my nortriptyline dosage. In January 2004, I returned to my physician with pain in my mid-chest. He reasoned that perhaps all of the anti-inflammatory medications that I had taken might have worsened the burning sensation in my chest, which he assumed was due to acid reflux. The Protonix had not been alleviating the pain, so he ordered an upper GI scope. And what did that reveal? Nothing. Perfectly normal, as usual. In February, I was still experiencing burning pains in my chest, so my doctor ordered a complete abdominal ultrasound, which revealed that my gallbladder, liver, spleen, pancreas, kidneys, and aorta were all normal. On March 4th, I stopped by the local dog shelter to browse at the animals. When I entered the building, I felt a strange sensation rush over me. I've never really been faint before, but I suppose that's how I was feeling, a bit like I was going to pass out. There was a lot of pain and pressure in my chest, like an elephant was sitting on me, and the air was being pushed out of me. I sat down immediately and called my husband. He rushed me to an urgent care facility, but by the time we arrived there, I felt fine. They did an EKG and some blood work anyway, but all of it was normal. 4 days later, I returned to my primary physician for chest discomfort. They took x-rays of my chest, which were normal. So they ordered a CAT scan and said that if it came back normal, I should seek trigger point injections through the pain clinic. Well, guess what? CAT scan was normal, so off to the pain clinic I went. My appointment was on March 22nd, and they decided to try me on some lidoderm patches and Bextra, and also Neurontin, an anticonvulsant, at bedtime. Now I'll share with you a few entries from my journal from March 2004. March 25th. While driving home for lunch break, I was crying in the car and almost drove myself to the hospital because the pain is so bad and I have this crushing pain in my chest. I don't know how to describe so many of my symptoms other than it feels like I should be in the hospital. March 26th. Beautiful weather today, but I didn't go for a walk or play with my dog. This is so uncharacteristic of me, so I know something is seriously wrong. I stayed home from work to relax and be inactive and to not have to talk because it hurts my lungs so much. But it didn't seem to really help at all. I rode in my husband's truck today. It was a very rough ride, which is painful for me. I called my mom crying because I have a weird sensation in my chest and lungs that feels like I'm breathing a chemical. And it's even worse when I lay down. It seems to come and go on its own. Perhaps it's from these lidoderm patches the pain specialist has me wearing on my chest. I don't know. Yesterday, I called his office to tell him about this, and they told me to weather the storm a bit longer. What? March 27th. Chest is acting up again, so looks like it's going to be a no-talking day. And no way could I wear a bra or use the shoulder belt in the car. I had that breathing chemical feeling again today from 5 to 5:30 p.m., but that's it. Random. No dose of nortriptyline for me tonight. I'm starting glucosamine and chondroitin. Hopefully that will help with something. March 28th. I'm still wearing the pain patches on my chest. I had that breathing chemical feeling a few times today again, and I started taking my nortriptyline again. March 29th. I awakened in the night with a ripping pain in my chest, like my ribs are tearing away from my sternum. Somewhat similar to a shin splint feeling, but no one's been able to figure out what this is. I know what it is. It's excruciating. I'm still wearing the pain patches on my chest, and I had that breathing chemical feeling a few times again today. But hey, I've only been waking up once each night for this past week, though, so that's cool. March 31st. I'm still wearing the pain patches on my chest. I had that breathing chemical feeling many times today, and it kind of burns too. Also, I have a pain in my lungs similar to when you run in really cold weather and your lungs burn. April 2nd. I'm having so much chest and lung pain today that breathing is making me cry. April 3rd. I stopped using the pain patches on my chest because they aren't working anyway, and maybe they're causing this breathing chemical symptom. April 4th. I had a follow-up visit with the pain clinic today. I'm happy to report that my pain has improved some, but I'm not thrilled to be on all these medications. They increased my dosages of Neurontin and Bextra today. April 26th. Another follow-up visit with the pain clinic today. The meds seem to be helping because my pain is minimal compared to a month ago. In June, I visited my primary physician because I was experiencing frequent nausea and intermittent abdominal pain in the upper right quadrant, and sometimes, but less frequently, in the left quadrant. Because I have a strong family history of gallbladder disease, the doctor suggested a scan if I wasn't better in 2 to 3 days. I was given Donatol and told to drink clear liquids as it could be a virus. A few weeks later, I returned to my primary physician with the same abdominal symptoms. He suggested continuing Donatol and also gave me some metronidazole, an antibiotic. According to the doctor's notes, he was optimistic that my response would be brisk to this approach, but felt that I may still require a scan to evaluate my gallbladder. A couple weeks later, I went back to the doctor because of abdominal pain and nausea. By this time, I had taken 2 rounds of metronidazole and belladonna, but I still had pain across my abdomen, sharp shooting pains in my mid-abdomen, and a frequent pain like a pole was being pushed through my stomach. These pains were intermittent but frequent and didn't seem any worse following meals. My doctor set up an appointment for me with a gastroenterologist. Perhaps we could have saved a bunch of time, energy, and money if someone at this point had just bothered to ask me what I'd been eating. During this time, I was keeping a food journal in hopes that I'd figure out if I had a food allergy or something. Here's one sample from my food journal. I wish I could honestly say that this is not a representative example, but sadly it is. 8:30 a.m., bagel with peanut butter and jelly. 12 p.m., oat cereal. 1 p.m., steamed rice with chicken and soy sauce. Afternoon, lots of Starburst candies at work. 7 p.m., Dorito potato chips and a bite of soup. 7:30 p.m., ice cream. 8 p.m., more ice cream. I can't imagine why my stomach hurt. This is so embarrassing and sounds crazy to me now, but it truly never dawned on me that all of this crap could be contributing to my agony. On August 12th, the GI doctor diagnosed me with irritable bowel syndrome, which I translated as, "We have no idea why you're having these problems or what to do to help you, so try this." Oh, and the "this" was more drugs. More specifically, Levbid and Reglan. They also recommended a high-fiber diet and said if I didn't improve, then I may need a CAT scan of my abdomen and or head. And possibly a colonoscopy. Nothing like the threat of a colonoscopy to make you more determined than ever to find yourself an alternate diagnosis. Unfortunately, I didn't get any relief from their medications, so I ended up back at the GI office a couple weeks later with the same ongoing symptoms. They wanted to order a colonoscopy, and if it was normal, they would treat me for functional abdominal pain related to irritable bowel syndrome. I already knew I had abdominal pain, so I decided to skip the colonoscopy. Thank you very much. And back to my internet diagnosis searching I went. December 2004. By this time, it was becoming nearly impossible for me to fulfill my duties at work. I was running an after-school program for 125 inner-city youth and managing a part-time staff of nearly 20 people. I began to accept that perhaps I was destined to a life of fibromyalgia, as the doctors had been telling me. I was so run down from trying to find other answers that eventually the only answer I'd been given started to look better and better. For the first time, I started letting people know that I had fibromyalgia. I must admit, it was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders to accept that that's what was wrong with me, even though it meant that there was no cure, no known cause, and really no viable treatment options. It just felt good to have a diagnosis, a simple way to tell people about what was wrong with me. Because by this point, the not knowing and the trying to convince others that something was legitimately wrong with me were almost worse than the symptoms themselves sometimes. Although it had been over a year since my original diagnosis, it wasn't until this point that I decided to accept it and to dig into learning what, if anything, could be done for me. I returned to the rheumatologist who had originally diagnosed me in hopes that he would have some recommendations. He was not of the opinion that drugs would do me any good, which I was relieved to hear since I had already started taking myself off of medications because I felt like I couldn't think straight anymore. I couldn't think of the simplest words. I would proofread emails 3 times or more before sending them out, and each time I would find more silly mistakes. I just started thinking about how so many of the doctors would start me on 2 or 3 new medications at a time, and I began wondering, even if I do improve, how the heck do they know which medication's helping? Plus, most of the drugs had side effects that were the very symptoms for which I was taking other drugs. It just didn't add up in my mind, and none of the drugs had completely resolved any of my symptoms anyways, so I felt I was just on the wrong path. The rheumatologist sent me to a pain psychologist because he felt that the best thing for fibromyalgia patients to do is to learn how to cope with the pain and fatigue that would always be part of their lives. I spent a few sessions there, and it was helpful. My husband came with me one time, as they suggested, and it felt great to have a neutral third party explaining everything to my husband with me. Even though my husband was always so great about it and always believed that I was really sick, I was still always a little scared that he'd stop being so willing to put up with it all, because what a bum deal for him through all of this, you know? He basically had his wife taken away. A few months later, on February 6, 2005, I entered the following notes in my journal. Notes that I wanted to share with my rheumatologist so they could be added to my medical file. Here's the entry. On January 16th, I told my boss I'm resigning my position at work because it's too much stress and too many hours for me to handle. It takes everything in me to come to work each day and pretend that I feel good. I used to be able to get through the workday, recover all evening or weekend, and bounce back the next day. But now I feel crummy almost all day, so all of my good energy and not so painful time is spent at work. Then I'm laid up in bed during my free time. I'm pretty much either in bed or at work these days. I don't do many optional things because I'm barely able to do the things that are required, including my job at work. After discussing all of this with my boss, we mutually agreed to experiment with possible accommodations that might allow me to remain in my position more comfortably. Hire more staff to help, reduce my hours and workload, allow me a more flexible work schedule, and the option to work from home as much as possible. We will reassess on February 11th. Here's a list of my current pains and symptoms. So many are difficult to describe, but I'll do my best. My whole body is achy, like I have the flu. I feel like I'm bruised all over, but no bruises are visible. It feels like someone beat me with a bat, especially at the base of my neck and across my shoulders. My whole body is tender. It hurts to lean against objects, like leaning against a wall makes me want to cry. There's a squeezing pain in my chest that's almost constant and often accompanied by shortness of breath. It's especially painful when I walk quickly or try to talk while I'm walking. Bouncy car rides are especially painful for my chest, and the pain is worse if I bend over. It even hurts to sniffle. My rib cage hurts all over, especially when I have to lay down. It's extra painful if my shirt is folded over and I lay on that part or on the edge of a heating pad, etc. Unbelievable. Sounds crazy to even write this one down, but it's a major source of pain every day. My upper and lower jaws are stiff and painful. My forehead also hurts, so it's painful to make any sort of facial expression or to lie on my face. It's like my facial muscles are sore. My buttocks are very tender to the touch. I take a chair cushion with me to work and can no longer sit on our wooden kitchen chairs at home without one. My inner knees are so tender that it even hurts to lay on my side with one leg resting on the other. I absolutely can't do it. My quadriceps are especially tender also. If I were to sit on a chair and rest my elbows on my thighs, the pain would send me through the roof. I have a burning pain, especially in my upper arms, and often at the base of the back of my neck and across my shoulders too. I have a pain that feels like swollen glands. It feels this way in my armpits and all the way across my chest in between. The doctors say my glands are fine though. I can't put my chin to my chest without a sharp pulling pain traveling down my spine. It feels like my spine will snap. I really don't know how to describe this one, but noises cause me pain. If I hear dogs barking or kids in a phone caller's background when I'm talking on the phone, it's like these noises actually cause physiological pain somehow. I don't get it. I have major stiffness and pain in my neck and shoulders, like someone took a bat to me. Overall, on a good day, I feel like an old lady, and on a bad day, I feel like I should be in the hospital. So that was February 6, 2005. A few months later in April, I wrote, I did not change my mind about resigning my position, so I will be done with work at the end of May. Since January, I've been exercising 20 minutes per day, on a stationary bike, walking my dog, some light free weights, stretching, etc. I learned a lot from the pain psychologist also, and I regularly use the relaxation techniques that he taught me. All of this has helped me manage my pain more easily. The gentle exercise seems to really help. It definitely seems ironic, and I didn't believe it could help at first. After all, I was in pain all of the time, and it hurt just to sit still. Exercise seemed crazy, but I started small and worked my way up, and I'm glad I did. My boss suggested that I get a second opinion just to be sure of my diagnosis before resigning to a lifetime of chronic pain, so I went to another rheumatologist at a separate hospital. Unfortunately, he agreed that it was fibromyalgia. A few months later, in June, I was relieved to be finished with my stressful job, and I began working at a part-time, very low-stress job. Things were better. I'm not sure my symptoms actually improved much, but I could cope with them much more easily because my work schedule was much more bearable and I had more time off to recover. I was still in pain much of the time, but I was functioning much better, and I sometimes had days when I felt pretty good. I still wasn't wearing a bra or a seatbelt and things like that, but I wasn't laid up in bed during all of my free time either. I maintained my part-time work situation for about 2 years. During this time period, I would describe my condition more as a syndrome with flare-ups. Rather than being in severe pain all of the time as I had been in the past, my symptoms would flare up and recede, flare and recede, flare and recede. Unfortunately, there was no rhyme or reason to the flare-ups, so I never knew which me I would get on any given day. I could go days at a time feeling pretty good, and then wham, out of nowhere, I would be laid up in bed. Life was totally unpredictable, but much more manageable than before. Then, while out of town visiting my mother-in-law, I picked up a book she had lying on her table. It was called Natural Cures They Don't Want You to Know About by Kevin Trudeau. While I did not adopt the entire protocol outlined in this book, the major take-home message for me was, if you want to prevent disease, you must pay attention to what's in the ingredients list on everything you put in your mouth. Wow, I had never ever thought about it that way. I was totally the lean cuisine meal, diet pop, and protein bar type of person until that day. I could not believe what I was reading. It was the hugest wake-up call I'd ever had. I learned that there are ingredients in our food like high fructose corn syrup, MSG, and artificial sweeteners and colors that are making us sick. I had always thought that calories, carbs, and fat grams were the only bits of information that mattered on food labels. If I wasn't overweight, then I assumed I had nothing to be worried about. Boy, was I wrong. Suddenly I realized that what matters the most on any food label is the ingredients list. This information made such an impact on my husband and me that we immediately inspected the ingredients label on everything we were eating. We came to the harsh realization that much of what we had been putting into our bodies wasn't even really food. Every ingredient label in our kitchen was filled with mysterious words and chemical names. Without hesitation, we completely purged our kitchen of processed foods and mysterious chemical ingredients. We threw food away, we gave food away, and we even sold some of it at our garage sale. We said goodbye forever to things like frozen meals, diet bars, soda, chewing gum, ice cream, and fast food. We began making all of our food at home from scratch. We scrutinized the ingredients label on everything we purchased from that point on, and if it contained even one word that we didn't fully recognize as having come from a plant or animal in nature, we didn't put it in our grocery cart. We also began to seek out local farmers and purchase as much food as we could directly from them. We wanted to fill our bodies with foods from the earth, not chemicals from a lab. We headed to our local health food store in search of some whole natural foods. We had no idea what we were doing, and we even thought the place smelled funny. We were definitely in a foreign land, but we learned as we went. Heck, we're still learning today, and while we do enjoy frequenting the health food stores, we have come to realize that we can find much of what we're looking for right in the regular grocery stores too. Without any hesitation, we switched cold turkey away from the standard American diet that we had been eating for so many years. And yes, that meant no more soda. For 4 days, my husband had the most awful headache. His pop of choice had been Diet Mountain Dew, full of caffeine and artificial sweetener, and it took days for his body to adjust. A couple weeks later, my husband realized that he hadn't had a headache since we changed our diet. Well, except for that 4-day withdrawal headache, of course. Prior to our dietary overhaul, he had headaches every day, which we had assumed were from sinus problems. He took sinus medication and pain pills every 4 hours every day before we changed our diet. Crazy, huh? He's never needed them since. After reading that initial book by Kevin Trudeau, I started reading every book and watching every documentary about food that I could get my hands on. I started with the books that were referenced in Kevin Trudeau's book. Then I moved on to the books referenced in those books, and so on. If our public library owns it, and it's a book about food, then I can assure you I've read it cover to cover, and if our library doesn't own it, I probably now do. I immersed myself in books about the food industry and holistic health, and I quickly learned that most of what I had always assumed about the safety and healthfulness of our food supply was completely wrong. When I read about the array of health problems that are associated with many of these food additives, I became very angry. It broke my heart to think about how many other folks were suffering needlessly because they would never suspect that food additives were causing or exacerbating their conditions. MSG, which stands for monosodium glutamate, is one food additive that particularly caught my attention because it's one of the most difficult additives for consumers to avoid. Food companies are legally allowed to hide MSG on food labels under dozens of innocent-sounding names, like natural flavor and yeast extract, so we're consuming it without even realizing it. MSG is a highly processed food additive that is added to foods as a flavor enhancer. By overstimulating our taste buds, MSG tricks our brains into thinking that a food item tastes good. Unfortunately, MSG also overstimulates and disrupts our nervous systems, which causes and exacerbates an array of health conditions, from fibromyalgia to heart attacks, obesity, anxiety, and depression. This nervous system disruption is not an allergic reaction. MSG is a toxin, so every one of us is sensitive to its effects to some degree, whether we realize it or not. Within just a few months of these dietary changes, I realized that I was no longer in any pain, and my fatigue and all of my other symptoms had completely dissipated as well. No longer were my arms so weak that I could barely drive. No longer was I too fatigued to get out of bed. Actually, I couldn't remember the last time I had suffered an episode of the abdominal cramping, insomnia, chest pains, or racing heartbeat that had plagued me for the last 5 years either. In fact, it seemed that I felt better and had more energy than most people I knew. And all of these years later, this is still the case for both my husband and I, as long as we eat a completely additive-free diet. Did I ever have fibromyalgia, or is that a label I was tagged with because no one could figure out another explanation? Do I still have an illness, but it's under control through dietary changes? Are some people just more sensitive to food additives than others? From what I've read, we all have individual biochemistries, so perhaps I'm low on vitamin E or magnesium or any number of other things that causes me to react more severely and acutely than some other folks. I don't know. These are all questions to which I may never have answers, but there's one thing I know for sure. As long as I avoid MSG and other food additives, I feel perfectly fine, and all the doctors could offer me through all those years was drug after drug in an attempt to patch me up with Band-Aids for each new ailment, and it didn't work. Unfortunately, most doctors aren't trained in nutrition, let alone in the sneaky tactics of the food industry, so I'm sure they were doing the best they could with the knowledge they had. But this is why it's so important for folks with experiences like mine to speak out and spread this information. About a year later, after living without any symptoms, I was working as a nanny. I did most of the grocery shopping for the family because they had seen my recovery and become interested in avoiding food additives themselves. I'd go to the store for them to ensure that their food was clean. Much to my horror, I came home from work one day crying and headed straight for bed because, as I thought at the time, my fibromyalgia was back. My chest-lung symptoms were back in full force. Oh, I was so devastated. My husband reassured me, telling me I'd be fine and that it had to have been something I had eaten. I scoffed at him because I packed my own lunch for work and I had eaten everything that was safe, nothing out of the ordinary. Later that night, he pleaded, "Are you sure you didn't eat anything at work?" I gave it some thought. Well, sure, I ate some peanuts, but I bought those myself for their family earlier this week, and the ingredients were totally safe, just peanuts. He insisted that I double-check the next day at work. When I woke up the next morning, feeling absolutely fine, with no symptoms whatsoever, I knew he must be onto something, so when I got to work, I checked the label on the peanuts. And there it was on the ingredients list, monosodium glutamate, which is MSG. I couldn't believe it. Even though I was thoroughly convinced that my fibromyalgia had been resolved through our lifestyle changes, it was very hard for me to believe that just inadvertently eating a handful of additive-filled peanuts could make me suffer so much. Needless to say, I was mad. I pretty much started on a crusade at this point to inform as many people as I could about MSG, which is hidden under dozens of names on food labels, and also about artificial sweeteners and other food additives. So, how did this happen to me? When I inquired about the peanuts, I found out that the family had eaten through all of the peanuts that I had originally purchased, so the mother grabbed some at the same store. She bought the same brand, but a different variety. She accidentally purchased the low-sodium version, but I didn't even check the label when I ate them because I assumed it was the same jar I had purchased. When food companies reduce the amount of sodium in a product, they often replace it with something else to flavor it, and that something else is almost always bad news. In other words, MSG, disguised in one way or another. Through the years, I've had a few other experiences like this one. I got sick once from attempting to go out to eat, and once from overdosing on cream cheese, which I hadn't yet learned was a hidden MSG risk due to the guar gum it contains. Other than that, I'm completely fine. In fact, I feel better, healthier, stronger than most people I know. Because artificial sweeteners affect our nervous system in similar ways as MSG, I'm sure that ingredient didn't do me any favors back in my fibromyalgia days either, since I was living on fake, sugar-free, aspartame-laden versions of just about everything. But I've never retested or accidentally ingested artificial sweeteners since then to find out, and you couldn't pay me to do so. So that brings us to today. I'm really upset about all of the garbage hidden in our food, and I work tirelessly to inform as many people as I can. Since 2008, I've been working directly with people to help them reduce the amount of additives in their diet. I've really gotten fired up because even folks who think they are eating well and who are putting tons of time, effort, and money into lifestyle changes are still being hit with excitotoxins like MSG because they are often hidden on ingredients labels under the most innocent-sounding names like natural flavor or spices, or they're added to foods that you would assume are just one ingredient like peanuts and sour cream. After reading books on this topic by neuroscientist Dr. Russell Blaylock and others, I've come to realize how truly blessed I am to have happened upon this information because these additives can cause and or aggravate a wide array of health conditions like headaches, migraines, low energy, insomnia, fertility issues, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, endocrine disorders, cancer, stroke, digestive disorders, eye diseases, degenerative brain diseases. The list goes on and on. From what I've read, some folks are even diagnosed with diseases like lupus and MS, and their symptoms improve or resolve when they successfully eliminate these additives from their diet. My passion in life is to help people avoid additives in their food. Folks have such a hard time believing that these lifestyle changes can make such a difference, and they are so resistant to giving up their old ways. But I've never met a person who tried the dietary changes and didn't feel better. There is garbage in our food that's making us sick, tired, and overweight, and there's nothing to gain by living in denial about it. We all deserve to look healthy, to feel good, to have all the energy we need to do everything we'd like to do. We are what we eat, so we must take the time to become informed about what we're putting into our bodies. As I just shared with you, I took my health into my own hands. I read every book and article I could get my hands on. I scoured cookbooks and recipe websites in search of meals that contained no chemical ingredients. And I spent countless hours in my kitchen experimenting until I learned how to cook. And yeah, sometimes the results weren't all that edible. I was also suffering with chronic pain, fatigue, and other debilitating symptoms at the time, so there's certainly nothing special about me that magically made this transition easy for me. It's just a decision that each person must make for themselves to do whatever it takes. The answers are out there for any of us who go looking, and in my case, the answer was free. I checked out books from the library and I did research online. I didn't pay to consult with anyone or to have a chef train me to cook. I just stopped allowing foods with mysterious ingredients into my cart. Then I looked at which food options were still available to me, and I stumbled around my kitchen to try to make something out of them. It definitely wasn't the smoothest transition, but the rewards were great. In 2010, I started my blog at completelynourished.com to help share what I've learned about the health effects of the additives lurking in our food supply. I've written hundreds of blog posts there to help you get started with reducing your reliance on processed food. Helping other people avoid food additives was not a goal that I ever had in life. Back when I was ill, I had no idea how to even cook. My mom still shakes her head in awe every time she comes to dinner these days. It's just all evolved out of my need to save others from enduring what I went through. I knew nothing about posting blogs, running websites, or creating recipes. I just knew I had to do something. Even after all that I've been through, I'm not someone who has anything against medical doctors or the drug companies. I believe firmly that the medical community serves a very important role and saves countless lives every day. But now I also realize how important it is for each of us to take an active role in maximizing our own health and wellness, and it's my mission in life to help folks do just that. It tears me up to think of all the people who are needlessly suffering as I was because of chemical-laden diets and lifestyles, not to mention the time and money that's wasted on medical diagnostics, drugs, and procedures in situations where simple lifestyle changes could suffice. I'm fired up about this, and I have no choice. I feel a strong moral obligation to do as much as I can to change the way folks approach their health, and there's truly nothing more fulfilling for me than to help people make these changes. I hope that you benefit from me sharing my story, and I hope you enjoy all the recipes and information that I've made available at completelynourished.com. Also, I would love to hear from you guys. What's your story? Have you regained your health through natural dietary and lifestyle changes? If you'd like to share your journey with our Completely Nourished audience, please send me your story. You never know how many people your information may help. This may sound cliche, but I know now that everything happens for a reason. While suffering with fibromyalgia, it was really hard for me to see any purpose in the pain. Now, I realize that I suffered for those years so that I could educate and inspire others to take charge of their diets and their health. So many people are so apathetic about what goes into their bodies. I was too. Eating really shouldn't be this complicated, and it's unfortunate that things have gotten to this point. It isn't fair that food companies are allowed to add harmful ingredients to food, and I'm determined to do what I can to help people become more aware. If you picture food choices along a continuum with prepackaged foods made in a factory at one end and fresh, whole, chemical-free foods like organic lettuce from a garden on the other end, I've become convinced from all that I've read that eating closer to the whole organic end of the continuum is better for our health because we're eating closer to the way nature intended and our bodies know what to do with those ingredients and can easily process them. Also, eating on that end of the continuum means that we have better control over our own health because we're not relying on companies and industries who only have their own interests and profits at heart. I truly hope that you will spend some time browsing the information on our website at completelynourished.com and doing your own research so you can make more conscious decisions about what goes into your body. Please know there is hope. Food companies respond to consumer demand, so please share this information with anyone you can. The larger demand we create for additive-free products, the more food companies will change their formulas and provide us with better choices at the grocery store. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story, and I do hope that you'll pass this information along to anyone it may benefit.